Hey everybody, Eshan Lacoste here with another segment of mental health, spiritual practice, and self-care from All Wyse Transformation. And the conversation is ongoing in how we sort of take care of ourselves in relationship with other people, and in relationship to ourselves, and in our environment, and what that sort of looks like. We have a awesome guest today, Adam Nicholson, who's joining us, who is a coach, who also does retreats around the Wheel of Consent and various aspects of in relationships with other people. Adam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Eshan. I'm excited to dive in. And as you said, my name's Adam Nicholson, and I do uh, work around relationships, coaching, facilitating, um, spaces so that we can explore and go into inquiry about our relationships, how to make them better, particularly through the lens of, I use the wheel of consent a lot, as you mentioned, and that's usually through the lens of conflict, power, and how we navigate hurt and harm. Those things tend to come up quite a bit and are often missing, I think, from a lot of the conversations and consent and relationships as well.
Nice. And I'll definitely have all of your information down below. So folks, if they want to find more information about you, they could sort of click on those links.
Hmm.
And I usually like to start off with Adam, what makes you curious about various things, or what makes you curious?
Uh, well, I always pride myself on my curiosity. That's one of my favorite things about myself. And for this work in particular, it really just came from a place of deep suffering and longing. I remember being in Connecticut and just crying in my bed and had been in my bed for several days because of some awful relationship I had been clinging to. And I just remember at one point deciding like I want to do this differently. I don't want to be in this place anymore. And so I began asking questions and seeking and that path, I believe when we decide to go on a seeker's path, those so many unexpected doors begin to open, and yeah, and it's also never ending, and I'm still on it and still learning, and that's part of what I love about it is this work, this journey, and the joy that comes from it is always ongoing. And whatever I think I figure out today is going to be different tomorrow and different next year as my life evolves and as I evolve.
That sounds scary. How do you sort of manage that? Like for me, anytime I ask my question of why did I do that, or what am I getting out of this, or why am I continuing? Like sometimes that feels a very scary place to be. I don't know if that's your experience or
What do you mean? What do you mean by scary?
well, to sort of own your power, to sort of own your journey and not feel like it's out of control. Because sometimes I think feeling like there isn't enough information, or I'm not enough, or I need to be perfect, or how do I become perfect? And sometimes that journey of self-discovery or that sort of shadow work can be scary, I think. I'm just curious if you sort of see it that way, or if you think that that journey can be overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's coming up for me as I hear you say that is, I think for myself and in my work with clients, I think a lot of the fear and scariness comes from the loss, the inevitable loss that is going to be present on these journeys.
Hmm.
I know that when I begin doing like deep work on myself, and I know that, I mean, it doesn't have to be deep work on myself. I know that on this journey, there's going to be loss. Friends are going to grow apart, relationships are going, there's going to be distance. in some relationships, and then there's going to be more closeness in others. But I think a lot of us in this culture that is based on scarcity and lack and
Mm,
extraction, we're so afraid of losing the things that we have that that keeps us stuck where we are. And, this is one of the big reasons I love this work with the Wheel of Consent because I think this is one of the biggest lessons it's taught me. I mean, when we hear the Wheel of Consent, we think about, some people might think about permission giving, or can I do this, or can we do this? And it's certainly about coming into settledness with our desires, figuring out what we want. But there's also the flip side of this, which is our limits.
mm,
And what am I going to say no to? What am I willing to be a part of? What am I willing to give? Because if we start saying no, um, if we can become comfortable and settled in our no and our limits, I think that fear and that scariness dissipates really quickly. And I think that only comes through practice. And I think in this culture and this American uh, capitalistic culture, we're not supposed to say no. We're supposed to keep saying yes. And so that part is really radical. And I mean, in my experience, yeah, if we have a lifetime of not saying no and we start doing it, it can be kind of clumsy. I know I've done it wrong or in ways that probably weren't as graceful as I would like many times, and that evokes feelings and emotions in the people across from us and in ourselves. But when we can continue that practice and be really clear about what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with,
mm,
then then I think we begin to learn that yeah, on this journey, I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna notice what I can do, what I'm willing to give, what I'm not willing to give, what I'm willing to be present for, what I'm not willing to be present for, and some people aren't gonna like it.
mm,
They will step away, and that's
mm,
just part of it.
mm,
And some people will step closer. But if we haven't been in that practice, I think that's really hard to see, which is why, you know, practice spaces like these Wheel of Consent workshops are so critical because we get to go in, it's not real life, and we get to practice together.
mhm.
And in that practice, it's so much comes up. It's that I think that's why it's so powerful and it never ceases to amaze me.
So I'm curious, what particularly attracted you to this modality, the wheel of consent? And of all those modalities out there, what was sparkling for you about this?
Well, my mentor, Mark Fleming, had been recommending it to me for a while. This was when I was doing more touch-based erotic work, and um, he kept recommending it to me. And finally, one night, I was like, "All right, I'll watch some of these videos." And I sat down and started watching these videos because Betty Martin, who created the Wheel of Consent, she offers like 7 hours of instructional videos for free. And I will never forget that night because it was just like hundreds of bombs going off in my body, these aha moments of like, oh my God, like I am so outside of integrity here, 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 here. And I was able to map all of these different, problems and tensions I was having with myself and with other people. And that was just the beginning. I mean, those aha moments just continue to emerge every time I'm in practice with the wheel or teach the wheel. New things come up. In part because I'm a different person every time I encounter it. And so it is it's a practice that's incredibly simple by and large. It's a simple practice, and in that simplicity, there's a depth of wisdom and understanding that can emerge that I find well, I haven't found anywhere else. And so my fidelity to the Wheel of Consent is simply because it's so powerful. It's worked for me. I've seen it work for hundreds and hundreds of other people. And I have never found another tool that allows us to deepen our relationship with our personal power, which I think is one of the most critical pieces of how we relate to one another. And in that personal power, it's that sense of belongingness,
Mhm.
which I think is vital to us being with our finding fulfillment in ourselves, but more importantly, or maybe not more importantly, but also to be in community.
Mm.
And in these colonial capitalistic systems where they don't want us to be in community. It's not designed for us to be in community. It's designed for us to be apart. And that's a very hard place to be in my experience. It's a very lonely place to be. But if we can each be in our personal power, and own our sense of belongingness into something bigger and deeper than ourselves, then we can be in community with one another. And when we're in community with one another, then we can enact real change. Then we can find fulfillment together. Then we can say no together. Then we can say no to these systems that are extracting so much from us and creating so much violence, particularly against certain people.
I saw on your website that you also have like some sort of social justice that you sort of combine with the will of consent. And is that sort of what you mean about sort of creating community and having a space where we're not sort of falling into sort of that capitalist mindset?
Yeah, so I don't do any trainings or classes on social justice, but it's a deeply important part of my life and my journey for all of these reasons. I don't believe that I can find fulfillment and joy, and certainly not community, if I'm not also um, with others on this path.
Mhm.
And what I find is that real, uh, I mean, social justice is such a loaded word, and whenever I've
Mm,
named it in the past,
mm,
so many people get turned off for that reason. But to me, it's about how can we be in community? How can we and to do that, we have to be really grounded in our personal power and who we are and our sense of belongingness that extends beyond my whiteness, my masculinity, my age, my money. Like those are real surface level identities that have nothing to do with my real sense of belongingness. But for those of us who were sort of born into or later in life given these privileges, it can become our identities. It's easier. In some ways it feels safer because the systems really value those parts. Um, but it's not bigger than myself. It's not rooted in anything deeper. And so actually my opinion and a lot of this comes if you want to go deeper, there's a wonderful organization called Right Use of Power Institute, but who I do a lot of classes with. Um, taking their classes. I don't teach their classes, and but I really appreciate their approach. Um, if I begin to find my rootedness in these shallow identities of money, whiteness, religion, age, prettiness, whatever it might be, whatever the culture of that space is valuing, then I'm not going to know myself, and that's going to create a massive amount of separation and distance from my own true self and from the people around me. And so to me, that's the linkage with social justice. It's all so connected. And so many of us are suffering and feeling alone and disconnected. And part of that is by design. We're supposed to be disconnected in this culture. Because if we all begin to be really rooted in our sense of belongingness and rooted together in community, we would say no to all this bullshit.
mm,
We would say no to all of this extraction and violence because it's inhumane.
mm, mm. Yeah, I think a lot of folks they like their comfort box, right? Like they like being in their, their safe space, whatever that looks like, and oh that's happening over there, or that's my neighbor's problem, or this is ours, and we don't need to worry about anything else, and just look out for ourselves. that's very limited thinking and selfish in a kind of way. Um, and it's very disconnecting. And leaves, like you were saying, it sort of creates more loneliness or that idea. Because I think, with as much as we're sort of connected with the internet, it sort of feels like we're more separated than anything
Mm,
else.
yeah. Well, I think I'm so glad you brought up comfort. I think and I want to connect that to what you said at the beginning about the scariness or the fear of these journeys. And I think comfort is such a huge part of that. Like we are so afraid to move out of that comfort or losing that comfort, and we become numb to uh, what it is that we truly want. Because comfort is not fulfillment, comfort is
Mm,
not joy. Comfort might not even be pleasure, or certainly a deep sense of pleasure. Because in my experience with this work, a lot of the work around consent and a lot of the sort of body embodiment work, particularly in the erotic spaces, is really about pleasure. And I tend to push back against that because yeah, pleasure is an important component, and many of us do not have access to pleasure. And so that's a big part of the work, and that part is true. But there's also pain, and like pain and pleasure are on a spectrum, and they go together. We can't avoid pain. And if we avoid pain, we're not going to find that deeper fulfillment because fulfillment and joy, I believe, encompass all of our experiences of pleasure and pain, and that we have to have access to both. If we don't have access to both, we cannot access fulfillment. But what I see is in that comfort that you mentioned, is that particularly folks who have a lot of privilege and therefore have a lot of comfort, are often unwilling um, to be on a journey that encompasses pain or discomfort. And so
mm,
they're only willing to be on journeys that include pleasure. And there's
mm,
a whole lot of workshops, there's a whole lot of retreats you can go to
mm,
that only focus on pleasure.
mm,
And again, for a lot of us, that's important because we've never had access to that, and it's important to have access to that. But there's a piece here around normalizing the pain, I believe, normalizing the fact that we're going to be in pain, we're going to be in pleasure, and that it is unnatural to seek a life that is always in pleasure. I don't
mm,
think that's the point. The
mm,
point for me is about finding deeper fulfillment, which is
mm,
going to include pleasure and pain and discomfort.
mm.
And that does not mean that we are being harmed. It doesn't mean that it's violence. And for those of us who have an immense amount of privilege, discomfort, we might translate that as harm. We might translate that as violence.
Yeah, I like that concept because it's a duality, right? It's like both things can be true. Like I could seek pleasure and also the pleasure can cause me pain. And the pain can also bring me pleasure, right? Because sometimes I think we move through the world as you were saying, thinking like it has to be one way and it has to be happy. I have to be joyous. I have to be kind. It has to be all of these sort of really positive things, and and both can be true. And being able to hold that, I think is sometimes breaks people's brains. The idea of duality that both things can be true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're marketed to 24 hours a day about seeking surface level pleasure and comfort. And we spend all of our money buying things to give us more comfort and surface level pleasure. Even as I think you just said, like even if those pleasures might actually be causing us harm or might actually be violent to our bodies or to our communities or to our relationships.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. So how does a particular when you're structuring either a session or a workshop, like how does that look like for you? Like how do you work on building a structure for somebody who's sort of looking for help to identify that it's okay to have both?
Mm. Well, it really depends on the person. And if I'm working one-on-one with someone, it's a very fluid and organic process based on where they are. I mean, that's the beauty of working one-on-one is we get to, I mean, I sort of have an outline of where we might go, but as soon as those challenges emerge, and everyone has different challenges. When those challenges emerge, we get to slow down, we get to pause and work on that, and then we create experiments and practices around your unique challenges. And in a workshop setting for a group, I mean, that is fluid and emergent as well. I mean, we're always trying to listen and follow the energy of the group. And we have a plan. There are, in some ways, sort of tried and true practices that help things emerge and create those. Um, and I've been in a lot of trainings where the facilitator is so rigid about that the energy of the group kind of collapses. And
Mm.
so, I think that, I mean, that's why I love facilitating is it's this sort of ballet dance, or that's not the right metaphor. What is it? The tightrope. Um,
Uh, oh, I know. Yeah, yeah. Tightrope walking, or
yes, where you're trying to hold all of these things simultaneously, and also, praying that it all doesn't fall off, which has happened to me, and it's that's certainly painful.
and when that does happen, like what's your process of either learning from it or the lesson that you think you get from when things do sort of not go quote unquote the way that you thought or assumed it should have gone.
Oh, Eshan, I mean, I don't know if folks want to hear all of the nitty gritty, but I think that there are ways to facilitate that can hold all of us, even if we fall off the line, because it's gonna happen. And I know for me, I have fallen off many times and not been able to have a safety net or not had the ability to stand up and admit that I had fallen off. And so my personal journey has been a lot of work and classes, working with better facilitators who know how to fall off that tightrope and hold it with love and intentionality and not ignore it, not bypass it, which is pretty common in my experience. But to make that a part of the journey, because it is a part of the journey, we are gonna fall off the tightrope and it's gonna hurt. But again, the hurt is okay. Pain is okay.
Mm.
It can be okay, or it can destroy us if we're marking that pain, if we're marking that hurt as violence, if we're marking it as um, something more than it is, then it's going to imprint on us in a really negative way.
Mhm.
Or it can just be a part of the experience, and then we get to create a new tightrope. I'm being very vague here, I realize.
No, no, I think part of it's like, it's okay to be vulnerable, right? It's okay to let people
Oh,
see your
yes.
vulnerability. And when that happens, that vulnerability, it's okay to sort of be compassionate with yourself when that happens. So I feel like I feel like that is sort of like part of what I'm hearing. You say that vulnerability is not as bad as people make it out to be, right? Like it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to goof. It's okay to fall off that tightrope and but yet be kind with yourself when that does happen
Mm,
because you're human, right? Like
mm,
the process of learning is ongoing.
mm,
Just because you've done this training or just because you've got this degree, just because you got this job that that it doesn't end, right? It just
right.
keeps on going and being open to the process because it's the process that's really going to teach you and not the expectation of what you think should happen. Because I
Mm,
think I think a lot of us get stuck on the expectation of this is how I envision it, this is how I want it to be, and this is how it should be. And when it doesn't work out that way for whatever reason, we get disappointed, and sometimes that disappointment is what holds us in sort of that that uncomfortable, dark place. And then we start, sort of self-deprecating. I'm not good enough, or why did I do that? Why did I say that? Everybody saw my flaws. They saw
Right.
my flaws, and who wants, a lot of people struggle about not having other people see their flaws.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you said that so beautifully. Um, yeah, this idea of being perfect, especially when we are the leader or facilitator, is so destructive. And yeah, I think you said so succinctly what I was trying to say more long-windedly, which is, I mean, it's really about that vulnerability, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And we all have to be vulnerable. I mean, if to me, I've been in spaces where the facilitators were not able or willing to be vulnerable because there's that belief that they must be,
The facilitator.
yeah,
Yeah, like,
solid or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. Like
And
I'm the teacher. You're supposed to work
right,
for me, and I
right.
have all the answers, and like,
Oh, so awful. I hate it. And I've done it. I've done it so many times. And I still catch myself doing it. And yeah, it's that return to vulnerability and willingness to be imperfect, which is also just part of this unraveling about being in, that circle of being in community, understanding my sense of belongingness with myself and my personal power. Because if I feel really rooted in my belongingness, that vulnerability is so much easier to access because I'm
mhm,
not afraid
yeah,
of being, of not belonging because I know I belong. I know in my bones.
right. Yeah, yeah. Not being afraid of being wrong. Like, you,
Right.
you're using one particular modality, one particular technique, and that doesn't mean it's the end all be all. It's just like this is just another way of approaching healing.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about when, because part of the segments that I'm doing is about mental health, spiritual practice, and self-care, and I'm curious, like, how do you sort of manage those three? Even though I sort of feel like they really are go hand in hand. And so when you think about mental health, and working on your mental health, or when you think about self-care and or your spiritual practice, what comes into mind for you? I know that's a lot, but I'm just curious about. Let's start with the self-care. What does it mean to create space for self-care and managing that?
Oh, yeah, it's a hard question. I mean, for me, I think the way it's evolved is um, to just do my best to really listen to my body and my soul, my spirit, what it wants and what it's willing to do. Um, I think the way that looks now is, um, noticing what I need to regulate, when I need space to myself, when I want space with other people who feel supportive to be around, and can I say no to people who um, maybe don't feel supportive to be around, even if they're someone that has been someone that I would spend time with historically. And so I think really honing and refining my willingness, my limits, what I'm able to say no to, and recognizing what I want to say yes to.
Yeah. And I think that boundary, right? Like it's creating boundary for yourself because I think sometimes people think boundaries can be selfish. But it's really about self-care,
Hmm,
and creating a space where like I don't have the energy to do this, or this does not align with my belief system.
hmm.
And that boundary is, yeah, that it's really important to uphold that boundary.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes. And I just want to name here because um, I think there's our individual limits and boundaries. And then also, when we are in relationship and when we're in real community, not sort of like fake community, like at work, or I might even say most like churches or these like these groups that bring us together to make us feel like we're in community, but actually
Mm,
don't offer anything more
mm,
rooted. Um, but when we are in real community, when we are in real relationship with others, there's also limits and desires and boundaries around those containers. And so it's not just about I feel like this work can have a tendency to move into the total individualistic nature of it all.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
but it's not just about me, and
mm,
that there are concentric levels here, and it's about me, and it's about us, and it's about our community,
mm,
and the limits and desires of all of those, and how we navigate it. And that gets super messy because it's all interdependent, and it becomes super complicated, and that's why I love it.
when you try to conceptualize or help folks get to a space where they can listen to their desires, because I think a lot of us um, go into sort of this dark place and thinking like my desire doesn't necessarily need to be out in the light, my desire doesn't necessarily need to be spoken, and so how do you sort of work with somebody to get them comfortable with it's okay to have your desires out there?
Yeah, we just practice. I mean, that's what all these spaces are for. And we always start with the hands, and like, because that tends to be a less charged, less meaningful. There's not a lot of meaning mapped to our hands for some of us. And so what are the desires of our hands? And we just keep practicing. And even when we're working with the hands, which might not have any like charged associations, it's still so hard. But if we can continue working that muscle and continue being in that practice, it begins to unfold. And I mean, the beautiful part of it is we may have desires that we know that we're not asking for, but when we really deepen this practice and become more and more comfortable asking for what we want, the real exciting part comes when new desires start to unlock, because there's so many desires we haven't even allowed ourselves to think about
Hmm.
because we don't know how to ask for A, B, and C. So we
Hmm.
haven't even thought about X, Y, and Z. It feels so far away. And so
Hmm.
like as this continues, just new and new desires begin to emerge. And it's so exciting.
Hmm. Hmm. I every time I've seen you talk or I've sort of watched you, you have like this very sort of Zen, sort of like the sort of like serene, centered aspect. And I'm just curious, like, is there a practice that you do to help you really be in the moment, to really sort of be present? I'm just curious if that's not too much to ask.
Yeah, the key, Eshan, is to just be as monotonous as possible, which I am. Um, but in terms of my spiritual practice, I mean, the things that have been most helpful for me is, I mean, number one is meditation.
Okay.
And I've been meditating for, I don't, 15, 16 years. And I now work with, in this Shaivite lineage of Tantra that comes from the text around the turn of the first millennium with my teacher, Paul Muller Ortega. And those practices have been, it's a contemplative practice and have really opened up so many new avenues and so much more depth for me. And also, like the work around the wheel of consent, it's really hard to extricate that from things like meditation and the things that I do in my more traditional spiritual practices, because it is through the work of the wheel of consent that I have found a deeper relationship with my belongingness. And I think that is what can help us feel more settled, more grounded. I think I didn't go into the wheel of consent to change my spiritual life, and it did. And that's really uh, one of the most powerful pieces of this type of work. It's not just about sex. It's not just about how you and I might relate to one another or ask for what we want. It's really about who am I and understanding myself at a in a significantly deeper way.
Hmm. Hmm. How do you charge yourself? Because I feel like you do a lot of holding spaces for people, and that's that takes energy, and it sounds like you have your meditative practice. Are you able to tell like, I can't overextend myself to do this, or this is sort of like in my energy level? Like, how do you maintain not burning out?
Yeah. It's hard, and I think that's a question I've been sitting with a lot over the last year. I moved to Tennessee last year so that I could have a little more space to take care of myself. And in that space, I've been really aware of just how much I wasn't taking care of myself. And when I say that, I mean I was spending almost all of my free time doing the things I thought I needed to take care of myself. And, for anyone who does this work, it takes a lot. I think it always takes more than we expect and other folks might imagine. And for me, I need space. Usually I need a lot of alone time after holding folks or groups. I need movement. I need nourishing food. I mean, we all know these things, and it's often hard when we're depleted to make those choices and to do those practices. But um, it's such a good question and one that I'm always in, and I think that's relevant for everyone who might be listening as well, because like, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we replenish ourselves in ways that are going to be truly fulfilling? Because in my experience, most of us were not taught how to do that.
And I think it goes back to what you were sort of saying a minute ago, in that sometimes the system that we're in doesn't isn't designed for that. It isn't designed for
Right.
self-care. So as an individual who works in the mental health field, and like you're in private practice, I work for an agency. We work with like high acuity individuals. And so even if I do take a step out of that, like even if I go on vacation, or if I do some yoga, just really nourishing myself with food, whatever it is, go visit friends and family, I'm still going to come back into that hamster wheel, because that hamster wheel keeps on going, and it's particularly designed to sort of um, burn you out, and to a certain degree, right? And this may come back and bite me. To a certain degree, I think like agencies, they sort of gaslight you in a way, where it's like, yes, take care of yourself, but when you come back, you got to do X, Y, and Z. Yes, have space for yourself, but like this stuff, all of this stuff needs to be done. There was an emergency that happened, there was a crisis that happened, right? Like, um, you know, yeah. So it sort of gaslights you to a certain degree.
Mm,
So like that system, right? It isn't geared to slow down. It isn't
mm,
geared for enriching community and for more self-growth. It's
mm,
like more and more and more and more and more. And I don't necessarily know if it's probably different in private practice, because you're in private practice, and so I'm always aware of how the system. Again, I love working. I love my job. I love what I do, but I'm very hyper aware that the system is ongoing. And even long after I'm gone, the system will still be here if the structure is still here. And it was here way before me, right? And so it's a dance,
yeah.
to try to manage.
Oh, you're making me so angry. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm not in an agency, and when I hear you say that, it's like, yeah, there's the crisis, and you have your 8 clients, and then what, you're supposed to go home and cook a enriching meal and
Yeah.
work out and or exercise or um,
Yeah.
yeah, in these systems of capitalism, like you can't do that. And in private practice, there's that choice is still there. I either have to wear myself out or not make enough money.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's it's all just criminal in my opinion, and
Mhm.
it's all a scam.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
the best, I have to plug Trisha Hersey here because I think she is a prophet for our time. And I can't talk about her enough. Whenever I read her books or listen to her, it is just a salve on my soul. And she formed something called the Nap Ministry, and she's in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's all about her first book, and her mission is about rest as resistance. And it's particularly through a Black woman's lens about um, actually coming into our bodies to rest is the most subversive thing we can do in these systems. And
Hmm.
what does it mean to actually rest? Not
Hmm.
just distract ourselves, not just do
Doom
these things,
scroll.
doom scroll, well, yeah, which is not rest. Um, but what does it mean to actually rest and to say no to all of the bullshit
Yeah.
that these systems require us to partake in? And that if we all started saying no, like imagine what would happen if we all just said no
Yeah.
to all of that extraction. So her book Rest is Resistance, and I can't remember the name of her new book that just came out, but she is phenomenal.
I'll definitely check her out. I'm always one trying to improve my practice, but yet also really try to embody what I do. And I feel like, Adam, like you really embody what you do, and I appreciate you. And I haven't been into any of your workshops, but I've always wanted to be in one of your workshops because I've sort of like just, been a satellite following you on social media, sort of seeing what you're doing and what's coming up. So as we're sort of winding down, I'm curious about like how would you give advice to folks who are either going to go in private practice or going to be a coach or wanting to do a retreat or a workshop? Like how would you mentor somebody who is trying to get into this field or advice that you wish that you knew um, before you put on the mantle?
Oh gosh. Oh, I feel so unqualified to answer that question because I've just been in such deep thought about it, particularly the last year as I've been back home in Tennessee, because there's been so much awareness around like what I did wrong and what I wished I had done differently. And I think one of the lessons that's been so clear for me is, related to what we've been talking about. And I wish I had been more clear about what I really needed for
Mm,
me. Being in private practice, like there was always something connected to the work. Like it was as good as I was at taking care as and I think I have a lot of great practices that fulfill me, but in some way they were always tethered to work.
mm,
Um, I was meditating for me, but a part of it was also like, well, I have to do this because I have to be settled for
mm,
my clients.
mm, mm,
Um, and I wasn't logically thinking of that, but I can see now that that was there.
mm,
Or, I'm taking this class around conflict resolution for me because I love it, and it's also for work.
mm,
And I wish I had been more clear around things that were really just for me. And I wish I had been in a place where I could receive them just for me. And I think um, that would be my advice. Because whether you're in private practice or in an agency or um, any type of service role where you're guiding folks on their life or journey, um, we do that because we want to do that and we feel called to do that.
mm,
And I think it's so easy to lose ourselves in that. Um, and so I would just encourage folks to find some really radical clarity around what it is, what is just for them, and can they allow themselves to fully receive it.
mm, mm. Any upcoming workshops or projects that you're working on?
Yes, of course. Thanks for asking. On I'm not sure when this is going to air, but in February, Helena DeFelice and I are going to do another Wheel of Consent for Queers online. We offered that last year. Was just phenomenal having a cohort of queer identified folks, and so we're going to offer it again. I
In
love
the
the Wheel of Consent.
Tennessee area or
It's
online or Zoom?
online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love doing it online. I know a lot of people don't, but doing it week to week, you have space to really go into inquiry, to think about things, to be in practice. And I love the in-person too. It's just condensed into a very short amount of time. So this is sort of titrated out, which is really well suited to my slowness. And so I like that. And then oh, we just changed the dates, but later in the spring, I think April, we're going to offer Decolonizing and Unsettling Consent with Roger Kuhn, Tunde Jeo, and Renee Rivera. And we're all Wheel of Consent facilitators, so there's going to be that piece will be there. It's not a Wheel of Consent training, it's really looking at what does it even mean to be in practices of consent when we live within systems, when we live on land that was taken non-consensually? And how can we really go through this process of unsettling our souls and our bodies so that we can actually find agreement with each other that
Mm,
is within integrity, recognizing that we are in these systems that don't want us to do that and have really trained us well not to do that.
mm, mm. And how would folks get a hold of you or find you?
You can just go to adamnicholson.co and all the information's there. I also offer monthly free classes around all the things I love talking about, which is power, consent, relational skill building, hurt and harm. So those are on my website as well.
Well, thank you so much for giving me your time and sharing your experience. And for folks, if you want more, I'll definitely put stuff down below if you want to find more stuff about Adam and what he's doing and sort of follow him like I do. And thank you so much, Adam, for joining me.
You're so welcome. I really appreciate the invitation. This was a lot of fun.
Yay! See ya.
All right.